How's it going, guys? Vaibhav here and welcome back to another video. Now this one is going to be about the mid-range OnePlus Nord 5G. In a nutshell, this is a mid-range smartphone, but what OnePlus did really well was the marketing strategy as well as the components that they chose on the smartphone and the overall experience that it brings and how it appeals to the OnePlus fan base on the overall. Now before we get into the first impressions, I don't have the smartphone, I've only experienced it in AR, but that's where I want to talk about the AR launch event. So this was one of the first smartphones ever to have an augmented reality or AR launch event. And if you don't know what that means, you had to download basically an application to access the launch event, and that's how you could attend the launch event and experience the world's first AR smartphone launch. Now to me, it felt like a mixed bag because it did have some good elements with things floating around that, had that immersive aspect to it and that interactive aspect to it, but at the same time it had some flaws. So for one, when you actually took a photo with the application, it sort of froze on you and you had to completely restart the application for you to get back into the event. For some, the event never opened or never worked, which was a shame. And on the overall, I feel like the things that you could have done with that event aren't really not replicable on an event that you'd probably watch on your monitor, for example. So I feel like there's nothing unique when it comes to that event. Plus, it drains your smartphone's battery a lot. So this was the Galaxy S20 Ultra from Samsung that I used for the event, and it drained from 55% to 15% in just 20 minutes of watching the event, which is a considerable margin. So I feel like this event doesn't have much of a future. I don't think it has legs to, come to the OnePlus 9 launch, for example. And I feel like this is going to be a one-off event, like how the OnePlus 2 event was a VR event. This is an AR event. They've got the moniker of being the world's first. I don't think anyone else is going to replicate it, so they're going to be the world's first and the world's only. That's how you get world records. But without being any more critical of OnePlus's event, let's actually get into the smartphone. The OnePlus Nord, it's not available in the UAE, as I said. It's a missed opportunity because I feel like there are a lot of people in the UAE who'd actually like this smartphone. It has pretty much everything a flagship smartphone should have, straight from the 6.44-inch Fluid AMOLED 90Hz display. It's also got a decent Qualcomm Snapdragon 765G 5G processor, up to 12 gigabytes of RAM, for example, a 4115 milliamp hour battery. And before I get any further, let's actually get into the specifications of the smartphone. So the flagship camera, this thing has the primary camera borrowed completely from the OnePlus 8 series. So it's a 48 megapixel Sony IMX586 sensor, completely borrowed with optical image stabilization. So you're gonna get good quality photos, but you're not gonna get flagship level photos when it comes to detail as well as crispness, and you're not actually gonna get the overall smartphone flagship experience, because aside from that flagship camera, you're getting some pretty mediocre other cameras to accompany it. Now, the optical image stabilization does help you with nightscape mode, for example, where you'll be able to stay much more stable when taking these photos. But aside from that, the ultra wide angle camera is an 8 megapixel sensor. The macro camera is a 2 megapixel sensor and the depth sensor is a 5 megapixel sensor. So the other cameras aren't really up there, and this brings me to one peculiar point that OnePlus pointed out when I was at the OnePlus 7 or even the OnePlus 7T launch last year in the UK. So they said you didn't really need macro cameras to deliver macro photos, and the ultra wide angle camera was more than enough to do that. And that's why the OnePlus 7T never really had a macro camera. It only took macro images with the ultra wide angle lens. I feel like with the 2 megapixel macro sensor on the OnePlus Nord, OnePlus is taking a step back, which seems a bit odd. Now the 2 megapixel camera is not going to be up there when it comes to quality, and I feel like OnePlus did this because if they managed to make the 8 megapixel ultra wide angle camera capable of taking macros in itself, it would really make the OnePlus 8 a hard sell, because the OnePlus 8 has a 16 megapixel ultra wide angle camera which can also do macro images. And let's say if the Nord borrowed that camera too, what's the reason for people to pick the OnePlus 8 over the OnePlus Nord? But I think that's just my opinion on the Nord's camera, just from the specification sheet. Now, as far as the front cameras go, you're looking at two So on the overall, you're looking at 6 cameras on the smartphone. The 2 cameras on the front, the primary one is a 32 megapixel Sony IMX616 sensor. I think it's going to be pretty good for your detailed selfies. And what this thing has is something that the Realme 6 smartphone has when it comes to the ultra wide angle sensor on the front. So it's got an 8 megapixel ultra wide sensor for you to capture your group selfies without you needing any sort of selfie stick. Again, it's a big deal and people are sort of going crazy over it, but I don't think it's a new feature. It's just a feature that when OnePlus introduces it, it becomes one that people really look at. Oxygen OS is no surprise. You're looking at Oxygen OS 10 on top of Android 10, Android 11 whenever it comes out officially. So all of that is great. And OnePlus actually waited to perfect this Oxygen OS experience with the 765 5G processor. And that's why they finally made that mid-range smartphone, according to what they've claimed. Now, as far as the display goes, we're looking at a 6.44-inch Fluid AMOLED display. It's a 90 Hz panel. All of that is pretty great. I feel like when it comes to display, they've done a fantastic job. The only thing this thing is lacking is that it doesn't have HDR support. And if you pair this up with the speaker on board, it's only a mono speaker on the OnePlus Nord, which might be a bit of a disappointment for any of you guys who like stereo speakers on your smartphone. Once again, this has no 3.5mm headphone jack. So if you want to sort of listen to your music, you need a Type-C USB pair of headphones, or you'll need wireless or true wireless pair of earphones. The ones you might want to buy are the OnePlus Buds, but a video on that may be in the future. The 765 5G processor, of course, makes this smartphone the first ever to be this cheap with 5G support. All of that is great, but the processor on the actual smartphone doesn't make it capable of recording 4K 60 FPS footage from the camera. So this thing can only do 4K 30 FPS footage from the back camera, but weirdly enough, the front-facing camera can actually record in 4K 60 FPS. That's just something I wanted to mention. Warp Charge 30T comes as well. We've got a 4115 mAh battery on this thing. With Warp Charge 30T, you're looking at a 0 to 70% increment in just 30 minutes. So pretty much the makings of a flagship smartphone. If you want to read more about the actual event, you can do so by checking out GN Tech. This is basically a written version of this video if you want to check it out. But as far as pricing goes, what is this thing going to be priced at? Well, I think OnePlus is focusing a lot when it comes to the European as well as the Indian market, but the OnePlus Nord in Europe is going to start at 399 euros, which around translates to around the 1,600 dirham price tag. And in India, it's actually going to sell for 24,999 rupees, which translates to around the 1,200 and something dirham price tag. So I feel like this is a box standard mid-range smartphone with good enough specifications to rival flagship smartphones, but nothing that can really overtake flagship smartphones when it comes to processing, nor when it comes to camera technology. So OnePlus has done a good job with its marketing strategy, making it one of the highly desirable smartphones of 2020, but I don't know how it's going to perform in the real world, and hopefully I get to try it out sometime very soon, because in the UAE, it's not even up for sale. I wish this smartphone was up for sale in the UAE, because I would buy it in a heartbeat, just because I want to experience the world's first OnePlus Nord, but also because it does have a genuine market in the UAE. People are looking for such smartphones, and if this thing can deliver on its promises and maybe take decent photos, which I know it'll be able to take, plus it looks pretty good, I don't know why people would buy a flagship smartphone ever again, unless they actually genuinely need that processing power for things like gaming, for example. It's even got high-end build quality with the Gorilla Glass 5 protection and OnePlus's alert slider. So you're pretty much looking at the best a mid-range smartphone can do of replicating a flagship smartphone without making any notable sacrifices. So that's my thought on the OnePlus Nord and its event. Do stay tuned for more videos to come on the smartphone if I do get my hands on it, and I'll be sure to do some comparisons, do some gaming reviews if this thing actually comes into my house. But thanks for watching this one. Do let me know what you guys want to see in the future down in the comments. Make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. This was Vaibhav, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.